Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. I'm Madam Yanti, and we will continue with the last subtopic, which is under adenosine triphosphate ATP. Now we go through the hydrolysis of ATP. Please be focused, and as usual, make sure that you all have a strong internet connections, and please wear your headphones to get the clear sounds. Okay, so hydrolysis of ATP is used to breaking down the phosphate groups of ATP by and forming ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and inorganic phosphate. So when you look at this diagram, you can see that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, getting their name triphosphate because it have three phosphate groups. Okay, and when there's an addition of water, water is added, and there will be hydrolysis. What will happen? The phosphate groups one phosphate group will be break down, and it becoming inorganic phosphates, and now the compound are not adenosine triphosphate because it lost one of the phosphate group. It will become adenosine diphosphate, and this is exergonic reactions. And when we talk about exergonic reaction, meaning that the energy will be released. So in this process, 7.6 kilocalorie of energy per mole of ATP being hydrolyzed. There are three mechanisms to generate ATP. The first one is substrate level phosphorylation. So what I mean by substrate level phosphorylation is ATP is directly being generates, okay, by transfer one phosphate group from a substrate to the ADP. Alright, so when the substrate transfer one phosphate group to ADP, now the ADP have gaining another one phosphate groups, and it become ATP. And what happened to the substrate? The substrate will become a product. So this substrate level phosphorylation we can look at when we learn about glycolysis and also the Krebs cycles. And then the second mechanism is oxidative phosphorylations, energy from food. So this oxidative phosphorylation, meaning that the food is oxidized and the energy, the ATP, will be extracted from the electron by an electron transport change. So this extracted energy used to make ATP by chemiosmosis process, which against the concentration gradient. Okay, the last, which is the third mechanism, is photophosphorylations, which is energy from the sunlight. So meaning that the ATP is being produced by chemiosmosis, but this time in plant cells, and it's the energy come from the sunlight. Okay, how ATP performs work. So once ATP being produced, okay, by the three mechanism as I said before, and then this ATP will be broken down and will be used as the energy to do the chemical work, to do the mechanical work. Alright, so what happened to the non-usable energy is will release as a heat. Okay, so this is some usefulness of ATP for the living organism. Okay, the first one is for movement. So as I said at the early slide, ATP is very useful for the living organism to move. Okay, whether you move with your leg whether you move, whether the bacteria move with the cilia, with the flagella. So all this movement will be controlled by a muscle contraction and relaxations. So how the muscle can be contract, how the muscle can be relaxed. So there are some protein inside the muscle, which what we call myosins. So in order to do the muscle contractions, there must be a source of ATP. So ATP is very useful to make a movement. So you pernah terbayang tak macam mana kromosom boleh bergerak during the prophase, metaphase, anaphase and telophase. So all these with the helps of ATP. Okay, the second benefits of ATP is to do the anabolic processes. So anabolic processes, when you recap balik, you belajar chapter 1, anabolic is the process from the simple molecule to become a complex molecule. So you need a lot of energy to build something complex. So ATP is required. And then the next benefits of ATP is to do the secretions. Okay, so all living things need to do a secretion process. So in the terms of sweating, in the term of secrete the urine, you secrete the waste, the toxic waste from the body. So when we need to secrete this kind of toxic waste, there must be also muscle contractions and relaxation. So how this happen? With the helps of ATP. And the next one is ATP is very significant for active transport. So you know that active transport is the movements of the substance or ions, okay, across the plasma membranes against the concentration gradient. So when you against the concentration gradients, you need a lot of energy to push in the gradients, okay, to push you up the gradient. So what kind of energy needed? It is from ATP. I bagi analogi yang mudah je. When you are going to hiking, okay, you nak panjat gunung, alright, you bangun pagi, you tak makan, okay, adakah you boleh sampai dekat puncak? Cukup tak tenaga you? Ataupun you sampai separuh jalan je, you dah rasa nak pingsan sebab you tak makan? Okay, you tak ada tenaga lah sebab you tak makan. You tak ada source of foods yang boleh tukar untuk menjadi tenaga ATP. Okay, compare to you bangun pagi, you minum Milo, you makan chocolate bar, and then you pergi hiking and you boleh sampai dekat puncak. Walaupun you penat, tapi you masih ada energi untuk sampai dekat puncak dan you turun balik. Okay, so kenapa you boleh ada energi untuk sampai dekat puncak? Because you makan. Okay, you ambil Milo, you ambil chocolate bar. Okay, so this Milo and chocolate bar contain glucose, yang mana dia akan menjalankan glucose akan bergabung dengan oksigen dan dia akan hasilkan tenaga untuk you, membolehkan you untuk naik dekat puncak. Okay, so this is a very simple analogy for active transport. Alright. Okay, ATP cycle is very important in order to resume the ATP that has been used. Okay, without ATP cycles, there's no functions of ADP. Okay, so what is ATP cycle? Is the continuously process of from ATP being breakdown to ADP and ADP becoming ATP again. Okay, this must be happen inside the cells. So without these cycles, you akan ada masalah lah. Okay, badan kita sendiri tak boleh menghasilkan a good ATP. So ATP, in order to becoming ADP, okay, there must be hydrolysis process by additions of water, and ATP will be breakdown. One phosphate group will be released, and this will be used as energy for cellular work. What is cellular work? Yang tadi kita dah belajar sebelum ni, anabolic processes, secretion, we use for active transport, okay, and this process will be assisted by the enzyme, or it being catalyzed by the enzyme ATPase, okay, and ADP. So now ATP becoming adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate, and what happened next? ADP to become ATP, okay, they must need energy from the catabolism process. So this energy from catabolism process will adding a phosphate groups to the ADP with the helps of catalyzing enzyme ATP synthetase. So this process required energy. Okay. Okay, now I try to simplify about the cellular respiration. Basically cellular respiration is a breaking down of glucose. One molecule of glucose being oxidized ataupun being breakdown into carbon dioxide and water. This is a catabolic process because from a complex molecule, glucose is a complex molecule, is being breakdown into a smaller molecule. So it is a catabolism process. And when we talk about catabolic process or catabolisms, it is exergonic reactions. And this breakdown of glucose will result in produce of 30 or 32 ATP. So this calculations you will learn with other lecturer. Okay, so please stay tuned. So now after this I will explain about glycolysis. So in glycolysis you can see how many ATP being used and how many ATP being produced. Alright, there are 3 stages of cellular respiration. Okay, there are a few processes to harvest the energy from glucose. So the first process, the first and very most important process is glycolysis. So glycolysis is the breakdown of one molecule of sugar into 2 molecules of pyruvate. So we know that glucose is a very complex compound. Okay, it must pass through the membranes to get through from the cytoplasm. It must pass through the membrane and go inside the mitochondria. So glucose is too big to pass through the membrane. So what will happen? It needs to be breakdown. So the breakdown of glucose is by glycolysis process. And after that, from the cytoplasms, the pyruvate must undergo a link reaction, okay, and it can go through the Krebs cycle inside the mitochondria. So the Krebs cycle is the complete breakdown of the glucose, and lastly, inside the mitochondria also there will be oxidative phosphorylation. So basically, these 3 processes is synchronized with each other. So you need to know the glycolysis first, the link reaction, Krebs cycles, and lastly is the oxidative phosphorylation. So at the last, you will learn how to calculate the amount of ATP being produced. Alright, this is a diagram shows the overview of cellular respirations. So as I said before, there are three main stages. The first one is the glycolysis, which is happen inside the cytosol or cytoplasms. Okay, so what is glycolysis? Is the breakdown of glucose into pyruvates, and it must pass through the mitochondrial membrane, and to go through this membrane, it must undergo link reactions. The pyruvate will be oxidized into acetyl-CoA, and inside the mitochondria, when the pyruvate are being converted into acetyl-CoA, then it will undergo citric acid cycle, and this citric acid cycle also will produce the ATP. And lastly is the last process inside the mitochondria is oxidative phosphorylation or electron transport change and chemiosmosis. So this is also will produce ATP. Alright. And where does cellular respiration take place? Okay, the cellular respiration take place in the two parts of the cells, as I said before, which is glycolysis happen in the cytoplasms, Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation happen in the mitochondria. Alright, now we go to the first mechanisms on how to generate ATP. The first mechanism, which is the biochemical process called glycolysis, which will break down of glucose, one molecule of glucose 6 carbon into 2 molecule of pyruvate 3 carbon compound. In glycolysis, there will be 10 steps that you need to understand and remember. And there are also a specific enzyme which catalyze the reactions, and also you need to remember. Okay, and this glycolysis process happen in the cytoplasms, and there will be two phases, which is the first one, investment phase, which is during this phase the ATP will be used. Okay, that's why we call it as an investment. Okay, we consume the ATP. And the second phase will be the payoff phase, which is how ATP is made. How ATP will be produced back. Okay, and bear in mind, glycolysis can be happen with the presence of oxygen and also with the absence of oxygen. Presence. All right. If there's no oxygen's presence, what will happen? The glycolysis still will be breakdown into 2 pyruvate, but the process are not cellular respiration anymore. It will become fermentation. So the product are not being used for the next electron transport change. Okay, so the product for an aerobic respiration is ethanol or lactate. Alright, for investment and payoff phase in glycolysis pathway, I will explain further in the YouTube. Okay, please check on my YouTube. Alright, so we have end with this lecture, but you have another subtopic under cellular respirations. So let's recap. We already covered the cellular respiration, the definition, the equations, redox reactions, what is ATP, what is the structures of ATP, and then you know the functions of ATP. And also we have learned about first mechanism on how to generate ATP, which is glycolysis, and there are a few steps that you need to understand and remember with the enzyme involved in specific reactions. And also in glycolysis, we already know how many ATP being used, how many ATP being invested, and how many ATP being produced back. Okay, which is the investment phase and payoff phase. So for the next subtopic will be covered by others lecturer, and I hope that you will updated with the lecture notes, and anything we will remind you in the group WhatsApps. Okay, have a nice day. Assalamualaikum.